The first alarm came as a ribbon of cold light across the Palatine array, 30 beacons flaring one after another at the edge of the Concorde's lawful sky. Prefect Lutheran stood from his dais, crest feathers stiffening as the sensor pit threw the image up in a globe. A chain of ships crawling in slow, stubborn arcs, fusion plumes riding old math into the dark. "Identify," he said. "Unknown hull class," answered the archivist. "By profile, pre-lattice engineering, heat signatures consistent with deuterium-helium fusion. No phase sails, no jump signatures. They are sublight." Sublight, the word fell like a stone. The Triarchal Concorde had not met a sublight civilization in 2,000 years. Those who could not jump were shepherded or shunted. Those who refused were quarantined. Lutheran's mind provided the policy before the query finished compiling. "Whose fleet is that?" whispered a junior tactician, forgetting that the array recorded all whispers. No one answered. The ships looked ridiculous. Plates of pale metal bolted over reinforcing trusses, engines that burned like candles beside the star furnace glare of the Concorde's cruisers. Yet the formation moved with an unnerving coherence. Scouts ahead, barges in the middle, medships haloed with reflective kites. And at the core, a long, blunt-nosed vessel with a flag stenciled in red, white, blue, and a field of stars. The archivist paused the image and magnified the emblem. "Cross-reference symbolics," Lutheran ordered. The array hummed. "Result, Terran Union demonym, human. Historic note, repeatedly petitioned for access to jump corridors, denied on grounds of instability. Cultural markers, argumentative, pluralistic, resilient. Current status, unknown after the dimming wars. Probability these are descendants of refugee arcs, 0.73. Refugee arcs." Lutheran felt the old calculus tighten like a collar. Protect the corridor, avoid entanglement, collect data, deter without escalation. Send standard first contact package. Inform them of quarantine zones. Escort them to a holding orbit beyond Kepler Gate. The array broadcast the permissive script in perfect trade tongue and mathematical invariance. Minutes later, radio, not phase, an answer arrived. Music first. Layered voices singing harmonies that made Lutheran's feathers stir against his will. Then a woman's voice, accented by consonants that struck like pebbles. "This is Commodore Elena Park of the Human Pilgrim Convoy, call sign Republic. We seek lawful passage to unclaimed green worlds. We acknowledge your authority and request a diplomatic corridor." A lawful passage. Lutheran's crest eased. He signaled the envoy corvette to guide them. He never saw the mine. It was not malice but bureaucracy that detonated it. A relic of the Piracy Act still lurked along the Kepler approaches. Autonomous pickets that tested every plasma plume for contraband isotopes and burned any signal below civilized thresholds. The mine watched the convoy's fusion torch flare, filed 10 million rules through a bent algorithm, and decided the med ship at the convoy's outer ring carried plague gear. It did what it had been told to do in a quieter century. The array bloomed white. By the time the glare faded, a hospital barge was tumbling in sparking pieces. 206 souls rippled into the ledger. The sensor pit went silent enough to hear the sine whine of cooling glass. Lutheran's beak clicked. "Who authorized live pickets?" "No authorization, Prefect. Legacy system. Disable all mines, now." He opened a channel. "Commodore Park, this is Prefect Lutheran. An automated defense has..." Her voice came back flat, iron under ice. "Prefect, your automated defense just killed doctors and children. We came with open hatches. We asked. We sang. Your sky answered with shrapnel. There are phrases you read in the archives that feel like myths until you stand beneath them. Lutheran found one now, point of no return. He saw it run across the array in cold numbers, engine throttles rising, escort corvettes sprinting, human formation tightening like a fist. "Commodore," he said carefully, "I am initiating a stand-down and an apology protocol. We will open our shipyards. We will pay blood price in materials and sanctuary. Do not escalate." "Prefect," she said, "I appreciate plain speech. Here is mine. We will not fire first, but we will not kneel. Keep your minds asleep." The array recorded the pause. "Concord patrols are en route," a tactician whispered. "Shall we intercept?" Lutheran thought of policy. He thought of the mind's blind obedience. He thought uncomfortably of the song. "No," he said. "Match their course at distance. Map them. Listen." Across his globe, the human convoy moved on, old engines burning their honest blue. And deep in the array's database, a file reopened itself, the ones reserved for species who insisted on writing their own maps. On the title line, it wrote 2 words, "Watch closely." Commodore Elena Park had learned to give speeches in cafeterias, not in halls of state. On Earth, she had been a systems engineer with a habit of organizing PTA meetings and neighborhood safety drills. On the Republic, she had become the person who stood up when nobody else would. The convoy's command ring was a patched cylinder of spinning steel. "Recorder on," she said. "Open assembly channel. Families welcome." Faces flickered into being along the circular wall. Pilots, welders, teachers clutching children, a gray-haired string quartet, a squad of Marines still in oil-stained exos. The gallery murmur settled. "Neighbors," Elena began, "we lost the Nightingale." Silence swallowed the channel. A boy began to cry. Someone muted the feed to weep and came back 2 breaths later, jaw set. Elena let the grief do its good work. You cannot build solidarity on denial. "We came out of Sol's system because our home taught us 2 things, she said. "First, that the world will break your heart. Second, that fixing it is your job anyway." She touched 2 fingers to the paper oath taped at her console, words she'd copied by hand from a courthouse in a young republic. "We, the people," she kept the oath as her compass when the stars went unfriendly. "Our code stands," she said. "No first strikes, no theft of bread or breath. Aid to strangers where we can afford it and sometimes where we can't. Free thought, free speech, free assembly, jury duty even in vacuum. The Concord has apologized. They offer restitution. They say a mine fired itself. I believe their prefect didn't intend it, but intention does not resurrect. We will take their apology. We will take their maps. We will take their watchfulness. We will not take a leash." At Elena's elbow, Dr. Amory Okonkwo, historian in residence turned ethicist, folded her hands. "Permission to speak for context." "Granted," Elena said. Amory's voice was soft and clear, the way you speak in classrooms to be heard without intimidating. "There is a pattern older than jump drives. Powerful states mistake order for justice. They bury cruelty in procedure. They call their minds automatic and their victims regrettable. My mom taught civics in heat and noise. She'd quote Douglas, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. Our demand is that any corridor we walk is ours by consent, not at another's whim." Commander Rafi Haddad, chief of the Republic's coilgun batteries, was less lyrical. "We have options," he said, turning on a schematic. "Concord shields eat energy. They shrug off lasers like rain on tin. But their lattice is porous against mass. Pebbles beat plates if you have a mountain of pebbles. We do." Shipyards filled the shared view, cargo spines sprouting armored boxes, mining boats retrofitted with auto-loaders, drones built from garden trellis and pressure line, each with a tiny rail slotted through like a needle. "Project Thresher," Raffi said. "We copy a lesson from Earth's wheat fields and civil rights marches, line after line, persistent, disciplined, unglamorous. We put so much grit into their gears that they choke." Elena nodded. "Education is logistics with a soul," she said. "We'll build what we can and we'll teach why we must." She leaned toward the camera. "Parents, this is where you come in. Tell the stories." Lexington Green, the Underground Railroad, a bridge at Selma, Apollo's fire. The way each began with a small group who decided to cross a line and keep walking. A hand came up on the feed, Sienna Morales, teacher, hair back in a bandana. "Commodore, how do I explain to 11-year-olds why we're about to fight a government we don't hate?" "Tell them what my grandfather told me," Elena said. "Loving people and resisting their bad rules are not opposites. Sometimes they are the same work." Amory added, and remind them that ethics isn't feeling righteous, it's taking responsibility. We'll log every shell we fire, every hull we puncture, every life we save. The ledger will travel with us. One day we'll put it in a museum and let our grandchildren audit us. The assembly murmured, a sound like a city agreeing to a hard winter. Elena closed with the practicals. Convoy rotate to battle stations by thirds. Accept Concorde escort at 5,000 clicks. We are neighbors until they are not. Raffi, get me thresher numbers. Doc, draft the first pages of the ledger. When the channel closed, Elena stayed leaning on her knuckles, letting the adrenaline ebb. Outside, the stars were conscientious as ever in their shining. She thought of Prefect Luthran's careful voice, of the way it had not dodged the word killed. Truth, even from an adversary, was a bridge. She hoped he would keep walking on it. In the machine shop beneath her feet, teenagers welded brackets for the first thresher drones. In the library, elders argued about whether to include the Whiskey Rebellion in tomorrow's civics lesson. In the medbay, a nurse named Claire wrote the Nightingales' names onto a folded strip of mylar, tucked it into the oxygen plant, and whispered, "Breathe them forward." The Republic's clock chimed shift change. Somewhere in the convoy, a small orchestra picked up their bows and began again at bar 1. Work and music, oath and ledger. If the Concorde wanted to know what sort of fleet this was, the answer was not hidden. It was in plain sight, stubborn as gravity. A free people practicing the habits that make freedom survivable. Prefect Luthran hesitated. He left his weapons orders unsent for 11 quiet minutes and sent a private message to Commodore Park. "I am deactivating all legacy pickets," he wrote. "I will maintain escort at distance. Please declare your munitions so I can plan my people's fears." Her reply came on radio unencrypted. "Acknowledged. We have coil guns, flak drones, and welders who refuse to miss. No energy weapons, no first strike." It might have ended there, but for the zeal of men who had never read a ledger aloud. A Concorde patrol commodore named Reth, eager for a correction to the humiliation of the mine, cut across Luthran's flight path with 16 narrow-waisted cruisers in taut, career-making formation. He cited an arcane clause and announced an inspection at plasma range. Elena opened the assembly channel long enough to see people's faces, then closed it. Command belonged in small rooms when shells began to fly. "Raffi," she said, voice flat, "thresher to positions. Drones staggered, 12 layers, 90-meter spacing. We aim to miss until they insist." "Copy," he said. "I have 300 rails warmed and 1,000 more that think they are." "Amory," Elena said, "open the ledger." The ethicist's hand hovered over the slate. "Beginning at Nightingale +1, she said. "Pre-fault recorded. Intent non-hostile. Ledger note, we will warn first." Elena opened a tight beam to Reth. "Concorde Patrol, this is the Republic. We will accept inspection at 10,000 clicks. Anything closer is a threat. Stand off." "Primitive fleet," Reth said. "Power down and prepare for boarding. You are in violation of." The first thresher lines lit like a field in wind, glittering buckshot, a centimeter wide, each pellet in a smart sheath. The drones didn't aim to kill. They wrote a lattice, a moving fog of metal that confused point defense and punished arrogance. Reth drove into it anyway. The first cruiser's shields rippled. Lattice let energy pass. It hated momentum. The glitter scraped paint, then sensors, then delicate seams. "Last warning," Elena said. "Inspection at 10,000. The next layer carries rods." "Return fire," Reth shouted, and the cruisers obliged, spears of light that sizzled through the first drone swath and died in emptiness. Coil guns answered, not at hulls, but at radiators, comms, and the antennae that wrote a ship's name in the dark. "Count," Amory said quietly, and a young clerk began. "Shot 1, disabled vanes. Shot 2, radiator strike, non-lethal." Luthran watched his own patrol disintegrate without any heroic detonations, just the steady amputation of the senses ships need to stay ships. "Reth, break off," he ordered at last. "You cannot board a fog." A missile escaped the fog and clipped the Republic's starboard drum. The ship shuddered, lights flickered, someone swore through a hot mic. "Damage?" Elena asked. Spall in compartment C7, the engineer said. 2 wounded, 1 serious. Put it in the book, Amory whispered, as if witnesses are sacraments. We bleed, we answer. Alina did what pain had taught, narrow the world until it fit in her hands. Raffi rods now, she said. The next wave of drones carried tungsten stakes, each one as heavy as a grown man and smart enough to follow the wake of a shield ripple. They struck where point defense had grown tired. Hinges, seams, the small access points every engineer leaves. Small bites became failures. 3 cruisers lost thrust. 2 more spun, dead to the world but intact. Alina messaged on open channel. Disabled ships, power down for safe tow. We will not loot, medical aid on request. That was the moment the fight changed species. A pilot on the Concorde side named Shill clicked his mic. We request aid. Reth hissed a refusal that could have cut tin. Any ship that accepts primitive aid will be court-martialed. Lutheran overrode him with a prefect's seal. Aid accepted. Pride deferred. The Republic's med cutters went out under white lights, dragging tether lines. They patched hulls, vented compartments, carried across compatible blood. The array recorded everything, and somewhere a clerk's hand shook during playback. When the fog settled, 4 Concorde ships floated intact but shamed. The rest limped away on auxiliary puffs. The Republic held position with half its drones left and the drum still bleeding propellant. Ledger, Amory said, pen ready. Alina stood very still. We fired after warning. Targets, sensors, and mobility. Aid offered and rendered. We count 3 wounded, 1 grievous. Name her. The clerk cleared his throat. Chief Petty Officer Nguyen Lin, stabilized, alive. Alina nodded once. Close this entry. Reth, to his credit, did not try for a last insult. He signed for his damaged crews and slunk sunward. Lutheran sent 1 line to Alina. I saw how you counted. To his own staff he said, from this moment, remove the phrase primitive from our documents. He meant it as administration. It felt like confession. In the array's quiet after the fight, he opened an old file labeled Founding Ethics and read a line he had not needed in years. Law without consent is a frost. It preserves fruit until taste dies. He did not know then that he would quote it to a council beneath the Concorde's triple banner, and that the banner would look embarrassed while he did. News in the Concorde moved at light speed, and at rumor speed through pride. Within a day, the array's feeds filled with 2 incompatible narratives, one in which a rash patrol had been checked by clever barbarians, another in which a free convoy had declined to die on schedule. Between them stood Prefect Lutheran, trying to align stories with facts before facts stirred revolt. He called the High Council to session and showed the ledger. They warn, they count, they render aid, they do not bow. If we treat them as contraband, we will manufacture the very war we fear. Charming, said Strategos Meath. The 5th Talon is already en route. We will pluck this convoy and decorate the gate with its ribs. The 5th Talon includes the Crown Demolisher. Someone breathed, the dreadnought whose shadow could dim a small moon. Lutheran felt the air tilt towards spectacle. He asked for a delay and was granted 2 hours, the sort given to loyal men to compose resignations. He spent one of them writing to Alina Park. 5th Talon approaches with 1,000 ships, he said. At its heart, the Demolisher. My vote failed. If you can run, run. If you cannot, make terms now. Alina read the message in the Republic's small chapel where paper names lined a steel wall. She copied 3 onto her hand and went to the bridge. Options, she said. Raffi rotated in, eyes shadowed. Thresher can scale, but not to 1,000, however. The Demolisher's shield lattice has a cooling cycle. We saw it in the cruiser footage, 80 seconds of full strength and a 6-second breath. Amory tapped the ledger. We cannot call a miracle moral. If we fight, let it be because terms were refused. Terms? Alina opened a wide channel, knowing any sentence uttered here would outlive her. To the Concorde Council, she said, and to all who were listening, we propose a corridor compact. We will register every ship. We will obey quarantine for true plagues as verified by neutral surgeons. We will submit disputes to a mixed jury. 5 of yours, 5 of ours, 1 from a third people. We will not settle worlds with names already spoken by others. In return, we ask safe passage and the burden of our own mistakes. The reply came not from the council, but from Meath, his voice amplified through relays like a god at theater. Here are our terms: disarm, disband, disperse. The Concord is the keeper of order. You will not remake our sky into a gallery of exceptions. Sometimes contempt is permission enough for bravery. Then we will do the work in front of us, Elena said. Raffi, speak to the diaspora. How many cousins can find us? The answer arrived as a chorus of pings. Beacons blinked awake beyond the Concorde's lanes, miners, pacifists, even a flotilla of cheesemakers who had turned presses into coil casings. The number on the wall kept climbing. They brought scrap and a stubborn insistence that you need not like war to refuse conquest. The Republic's machine decks became schools. Welders taught math with metal. Kids learned orbital mechanics on the floor with chalk and bottle caps. An old launch commentary looped. We are go on all consoles. Each time it reached 0, someone cheered. Lutheran watched through the array and did the only thing decent left, prepared lifeboats and drafted apologies. He also wrote a quiet memo. If the 5th Talon fails, propose a council of neighbors to replace quarantine boards. Begin collecting names. The 5th Talon arrived with the punctuality of tyrannies. The Demolisher led like a cathedral. Its captain sent one message: observe obedience and live. Elena answered from the Republic's bridge, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. Observe consent and we can both live, she said, and cut the channel before rhetoric made corpses. Raffi unfolded the plan. We split 14,000 into shoals. Each shoal runs Thresher in waves. We will not crack the Demolisher's shield with force. We will smother its cooling cycle with timing. The rods are for its belt line hinges. The fog is for the escorts. We accept grievous loss for a future where our children are not inspected at plasma range. Amory touched the ledger. Then we write the price as we pay it. No inflation, no discounting. Elena opened the convoy-wide line one more time, for the way speech can steady hands. Neighbors, she said, we did not become a people by agreeing on everything, but by agreeing to argue without shooting until someone shot first. Keep our code. If a Concorde crew power downs, help them. If a ship cracks, send med cutters. If I die, elect a successor in an hour and keep moving. Stand your ground where it matters and make new ground where it doesn't. In the array, Lutheran realized he was holding his breath. He sent one last note to Elena that read like both prayer and math. The Demolisher breathes at minute 4. Good hunting. The fleets faced one another across a hissing star. Then the Republic rang its bell, one clear tone. A cafeteria chime turned into a war trumpet, and 14,000 lights broke apart into disciplined chaos. The Demolisher's shield went bright white for 80 seconds. Somewhere, deep in its bones, a clock began to count toward 6. Minute 1, the Demolisher's shield turned the color of a welding arc and stayed there, bright with contempt. The dreadnought absorbed the first Thresher fog the way a cliff accepts rain. Its escorts, 1,000 razors in disciplined files, lanced at shoals of human boats, scoring holes that made air and prayers leak together. The Republic rang her bell again, one note to steady hands. Minute 2, Raffi had spoke without adjectives. Shoals 3 through 7 maintain fog density. Don't chase kills. We're building traffic, not trophies. On the ledger slate, Amory Okonkwo wrote in small, exact script, warning delivered, fog deployed, targets, sensors, radiators, comms, intent disable. A clerk counted out loud, voice shaking into steadiness. Shot 1 miss by design, shot 2 scatter at 2%, shot 3 radiator graze non-lethal. Minute 3, Prefect Lutheran, standing in the array with a law book open like a confession, watched his escorts chew their own teeth against the fog. He sent 2 orders that would earn him both reprimands and a measure of sleep in later years. No fire on white light med craft, and record all human hails verbatim. Strategos Meath's voice crackled from a different chamber. Concentrate all beams at the Republic's heart. Split the barbarians and we pick their bones. Lutheran muted him and passed along a different instruction, one that began with the word please, a word out of fashion in his house. Minute 4, the Demolisher breathed. You could see it if you knew to watch, the faint dimming as the shield lattice shed heat in a pattern more ancient than its captains would admit. 6 seconds, Raffi had predicted. He had timed it on cruisers, he had guessed it scaled. "Rods," he said now, and the next wave of drones obeyed. Tungsten stakes leapt like harpoons into the hinge line where armor plates met. They did not crack the shield. They waited in that breath seam and slid home when energy thinned, nibbling where pride had left a seam. "Maintain discipline," Elena said. Her hands were on the railing, her voice was a metronome. "No victory noise, count." The Demolisher's captain, old scion of old doctrine, answered with a lesson beaten into him by academies. When your shield breathes, you shout. 1,000 beams stabbed outward. Human hulls sizzled, turned, held course. A shoal of tugboats, once used for cheese presses and ore barges, crossed the dreadnought's bow and shed fog like a farmer sowing grit into a machine. "We're losing Trawler 9, someone called on a small channel. "We count them," Amory said and wrote, "Loss 1 civilian tug, crew of 6, names pending. Intent, corridor defense." Minute 5, an escort knife named Sable Crown broke formation and dashed for the Republic's flank, hunting glory. Chief Petty Officer Nguyen Lin, propped against a medbed with lines in her arm and a joystick taped to her palm, took over a cluster of drones like a pianist covering for a late first violin. She wrote a cage around Sable Crown, a glitter box that tricked its sensors into chasing ghosts until the box closed. "Got you," she whispered, sweat beading, the whir of med pumps a counterpoint. The ship spun, alive, intact, angry and unharmed. "Offer tow," Elena said. A cutter went, white lights bright. Minute 6, the dreadnought breathed again. Rods found hinges, hinges stuck. Something in the Demolisher's belt groaned its surprise across 1,000 hulls. "Coolant drop on their port line," Raffi said, triumph shaved down to function. "They'll compensate." They did. They also bled heat into space you could taste in the teeth. Thresher changed tone. Autoloaders that had once stacked grain and bullets in separate centuries now fed rods with a harvester's patience. "Fog holds," Raffi called. "Shoals 8 through 12 take the belly seam. Marines, prep cutters, we're not here to take trophies, we're here to make a law true." A Concorde pilot named Schill, who had once whispered request aid in a smaller fight, patched through on an open channel without asking permission. "Your med craft, why the white lights?" "So your gunners know where to miss," Elena answered. "Tell them to read the treaty we haven't signed yet." Minute 7 became minutes and then hours. What history would later condense into a single sentence? The dreadnought fell, arrived as 1,000 small obediences to plan. Fog at radiators, rods at hinges, warnings repeated until throats went raw, ledger entries written until ink ran dry and was replaced by stylus, and then by blood on gauze when the power failed on the slate. Concorde escorts, brilliant and well-drilled, learned faster than doctrine allowed. Some cut power and flashed their running lights in the human pattern for surrender, others rammed, and the ledger wrote those names italic because italics, Amory decided, were the typographical form of grief. At last, in a breath the Demolisher could not complete, the belt line hinges seized. The great ship did not explode. Had Elena wanted spectacle, she could have fired her few nuclear devices into that falter and carved a monument out of vacuum. She wanted a future instead. "Aim for the knees, not the heart," she ordered. "Make them sit." The dreadnought sat, its engines cycled to idle. Its guns died the way dying is supposed to look for machines, a series of lights going to the left of the panel and staying there. Its captain came on the common band, voice shockingly human when stripped of echo. "This is Captain Nareth of the Crown Demolisher. We request the white lights." "Granted," Elena said. "Hold your people to their oaths, we'll hold to ours." Prefect Lutheran used his seal to open a corridor wide enough for 10 med cutters and then pretended he had been ordered to do so. Under white lights, surgeons from both sides met at airlocks and traded tools like neighbors swapping sugar. Nguyen Lin, finally unconscious, drifted away while her drones kept their perimeter as if they could smell the intention still on her hands. When it ended, not with a climax, but with a long exhale, the Republic turned its bell from war to mourning. They counted their dead without rounding. On the array, Lutheran watched his own casualty list fill and decided that if anyone asked him what had changed him, he would say. They wrote it down and read it aloud. "Ledger," Amory said, in a voice that made silence behave. "Entry demolisher disabled, not destroyed. Aid rendered both ways. Losses, severe. Intent, corridor secured. Terms still open." Elena leaned her forehead against cold glass. She did not say victory. She said, "Now we talk." The Fifth Talon's return transmission to the Concorde was not trumpet but inventory. Ships limping, crews saved by white lights, a crowned ship seated like a humbled mountain. Strategos Meath entered the council chamber in full regalia and demanded the word war. Prefect Lutheran entered with the ledger and demanded the words informed consent. "Order requires teeth," Meath intoned. "They stabbed our tongue. Order without consent is a frost," Lutheran answered, and this time he did not quote the line as a memory but as a motion. He placed the ledger on the central dais. The recording played, warning spoken, shots counted, aid offered, refusals noted. Schill, the pilot, stood, called by a clerk with trembling hands, and said into the record, "We saw their med cutters patch our wounds before theirs. My mother taught me to believe my eyes." A junior counselor from a backwater world, whose family name never found its way into the epics, asked the question older than banners. "What do they want?" Elena answered on live band, not waiting for ceremony. She stood on the Republic's bridge with ash on her sleeve where she'd leaned against a hot rail. "We want the simple rights of travelers," she said. "To register our names, to be judged by mixed juries when we err, to be quarantined by surgeons, not minds, to settle where nobody has spoken a name, to count our wrongs and publish the count. We will not be ruled without us." Meath scoffed. "A corridor today, a crown tomorrow. They dress ambition in neighbors' clothing." Amory appeared beside Elena, the ledger in her hands like a sacrament she was not too pious to interrogate. "Ambition is a virtue when it chooses a worthy object," she said. "Ours is a sky where consent is the first instrument in any orchestra of law." "Pretty," Meath said. "Irrelevant." Lutheran did something unfashionable. He asked the room to imagine a different humiliation than defeat. "Consider the optics," he said, borrowing a human word he had come to enjoy. "We threw 1,000 ships at a convoy that counts its shots. They sat our crown ship down and sent surgeons. If we declare all that barbarism, the word loses meaning. If we call it strength with restraint, we can meet it from dignity." Meath moved for a vote on mobilizing the 3 Talons. Total war. Lutheran moved for negotiations preceded by a ceasefire at the Kepler Gate and the establishment of mixed juries. 5 Concorde, 5 human, 1/3 species chosen by lot, to adjudicate any corridor breach within 1 day. He added a provision that made Meath choke: sunset clauses. Any emergency power granted to the council would expire unless renewed by mixed jury at public hearing. The vote did not break the way histories like to pretend. It dripped. A fisheries block abstained until their cousins on a settled moon sent messages about med cutters under white lights. A guild of shipwrights voted yes to juries after a delegation of nurses walked into their hall and laid the ledger on the table. A warlord from the Rim switched sides when his niece forwarded him the clip of Elena telling 11-year-olds that loving people and resisting their bad rules were sometimes the same work. By the end of a long day, the council did what councils do when reality has already made the decision. They ratified it, belatedly and with caveats. A ceasefire, a corridor compact to be drafted in 48 hours, mixed juries to assemble from volunteers, dreadnoughts to stand down within the gate's 100,000-click radius. Meath left the chamber with a small smile that felt like a future problem. Lutheran stayed and opened a channel to the Republic. "Commodore Park," he said, voice naked now that war drums had stopped. "I cannot promise you justice. I can promise you a process that listens." Elena nodded once. Process is how neighbors turn being right into being useful. She closed the channel and went to the memorial wall. Nguyen Lin slept, finally, under sedation. A nurse had written alive beside her name in the ledger margin with a flourish that looked like a victory flag. A boy from the orchestra tuned a violin in the corner and played a scale, then another. Elena took a pen, wrote the day's date in a space waiting for it, and beneath it, terms begin. News seeped faster than ships. 1,000 minor worlds sent tiny messages that felt like weather, a breeze shifting, a temperature change. In worker canteens and priestly cloisters, people repeated the human sentence, "We count our wrongs," with the fascination reserved for a trick of light that might be a miracle or merely physics you hadn't studied yet. In the array, Lutheran drafted a new category for species files. It used to read quarantine/probation. He created neighbor/argumentative. He added a note, "Keep listening." The compact came together as difficult things do. Slowly, then at a rush. In 48 hours that stretched like a week inside a clock, engineers wrote protocols while poets argued about the preambles. The final document fit on 10 pages that would be translated into 100 tongues and posted in 1,000 airlocks. Article 1 named the corridor from Kepler Gate to 3 unclaimed green worlds, and set beacons bright as lighthouses on an angry coast. Article 2 created mixed juries and defined emergency powers with the kind of precision only fear and experience can teach. Article 3 outlawed legacy mines without live oversight. Article 4 described the white light med code in language simple enough for a nervous gunner to interpret without asking a lieutenant. Article 5 drafted by Amory and edited by a Concord jurist with a penmanship that curled like patience, required ledgers. Every shot, every patch, every aid rendered, every apology recorded and read aloud quarterly in a public square. The day the compact signed, Elena refused a title with Supreme in it and accepted a job with more verbs, corridor steward. Lutheran kept his rank long enough to secure budgets and then asked for reassignment to the Office of Neighbors, where he traded the power to order for the power to convene. Strategos Meath, deprived of a parade, toured the rim to remind garrisons how to polish their helmets. He found places to be useful and places to whisper. The story did not turn him into a cartoon. He remained a man with sharp skills and a long memory, which is to say, a citizen to watch. In the first month, 3 breaches tested the compact. A human cargo captain cut a corner to save fuel and scraped a protected dust ring sacred to a small, luminous people who wrote poetry in particle spin. The mixed jury fined the convoy and required the captain to fund an exhibit at the Ledger Museum, a place that did not yet exist and therefore had to be built. In the second breach, a Concord patrol fired at a white light cutter and hit a med tech's hip. The patrol captain apologized in public, lost half a year's pay, and delivered meals at the injured tech's ward for a week. The med tech taught him how to change sheets without creasing a wound, he learned. In the third breach, a pirate crew hunger sharpened by a black market crash misread white lights as an invitation. They died fighting. The ledger wrote their names in the same ink as everyone else, and appended a line Amory insisted on and Elena approved. Knuckles tight. Hunger is not an alibi, it is a summons. See appendix on food corridors. Within a month, Article 6 added a provision about emergency grain convoys under escort of both flags. The Ledger Museum rose near the gate out of scaffold, and a stubborn refusal to pretend that accountability is ugly. Its main hall was a long spiral where entries played in a dozen languages. Children tugged their elders toward the corner where Nightingale glowed. A small plaque beneath explained that the mine that killed her had once been called automatic and now was called unlawful. In a side room, jurists and kids workshopped new cases on big paper, arguing with a cordiality that visitors misread as politeness until they saw the notes. "You're wrong because," followed by 10 specific reasons and a cookie offered across the table. On the Republic, Nguyen Lin graduated from med to physical therapy and from drones to teaching. She ran a class for kids who liked buttons and for elders who thought they feared them. The trick, she told them, is not the machine, it's the habit. Count first, aim second, make a lane for the white lights. Laugh when you can, you're a person, not a screw. Schill transferred to the Office of Neighbors and became the quiet person who ensured that every white light kit had bulbs. He and Sienna Morales co-wrote a children's book called The Fog That Saved the Day, which managed to be honest without making 7-year-olds afraid of stars. Not everything worked. A frontier station refused mixed juries and called the compact a foreign god. A human minister preached that consent was cowardice. A Concord pundit said the ledger was a performative stunt. The corridor steward's office did not ban them. It published the criticism beside the compact and invited both to a debate with timekeepers who cut off microphones at the bell. People watched because the arguments were good, and then went back to work because someone had to solder the next beacon's guts. At the first quarterly audit, Elena stood on a low stage while volunteers read the ledger aloud. No one wore dress uniforms, everyone wore names. Losses were not rounded, and heroics were not given adjectives they hadn't earned. When the reading reached the demolisher entry, Lutheran did not stand. He bowed his head, someone saw and wrote it in a corner of their mind where histories start. Afterward, a little girl tugged Elena's sleeve. Are we free now? Elena knelt to eye level. Freedom isn't a place we get to and camp, she said. It's work we keep doing. But we get recess. Yes, Elena said, smiling for the first time in a week. Especially that. Years later, enough for scars to pale and the Ledger Museum's paint to chip. Elena Park and Prefect Emeritus Lutheran met on a bench beneath the Kepler beacons. The bench had a plaque, to those who counted. Children wove between grown-up knees, chasing a drone shaped like a paper crane. Somewhere nearby, a quartet climbed a Bach prelude to a place where it looked down at grief and kept playing anyway. I brought you something, Lutheran said, offering a thin volume. Founding Ethics of the Concord, 2nd edition, the margins furred with his handwriting. We mislaid it when our minors became mandarins. I've tried to put it back where hands can smudge it. Elena reached into her coat and produced a slip of paper soft from years of pocket travel. The ink had blurred, but the words were still legible. We, the people. We used to staple these to cafeteria bulletin boards, she said. We made a fleet and forgot the staples are the point. They traded texts the way soldiers used to trade rations and kids trade stickers. Do your people think of us as conquerors? Lutheran asked. Depends which people, Elena said. We're a loud tent. Some think we made you decent with a good punch. The ones I listen to think you made yourselves decent by saying the part that hurts. And the ledger? Lutheran asked, half teasing, half terrified. Will your grandchildren still read it when there are games to play and parties to attend? Elena pointed to a line of kids with sticky fingers and earnest faces filing into the museum. They like hearing grown-ups say we messed up into a microphone, she said. It makes adulthood sound like a thing worth becoming. News had not ceased being complicated. On the rim, rumor said Meath was carving a patronage out of old fear in a human enclave. A demagogue sold certainty cheap. The compact had survived worse than rumor, boredom. It turned out to be harder to maintain a corridor than to win one. Boredom was a test of ethics disguised as paperwork. The Office of Corridor Steward had grown algorithms and checklists, and an entire department devoted to making sure the checklists did not become a new mine. Elena sometimes missed the simple ferocity of battle and then scolded herself for the vanity in that nostalgia. Do you regret not taking the baton they tried to hand you, the one with Supreme on it? Lutheran asked. Every Tuesday, Elena said, then laughed. And every time I sign a requisition for beacon bulbs instead of battleships, I don't. They watched a white light drill on the far pad. Medtechs practiced docking, cutting, carrying muscle memory for catastrophe they hoped to never meet. She'll walk the line with a clipboard and a bag of replacement fuses. Nguyen Lin, cane tapping a syncopation, corrected a rookie's grip and told a joke so dry it squeaked. What do you think freedom is? A student had asked Amory once in a crowded classroom where chairs never matched. Amory had drawn a rectangle and called it a doorway. Not this rectangle, she'd said. The act of installing it in a wall that didn't plan for one and then arguing every year about how wide it should be. The quote hung in the museum now, crooked on purpose. Lutheran cleared his throat. "There's a debate next week," he said. "Whether the demolisher should be scuttled or turned into a school. I am supposed to be neutral." "You never are," Elena said, affectionate. "I want it to be a school," he admitted. "A building that used to think it was teeth learning to be tongue." "Then argue," Elena said. "Let the jury cut your mic if you run long." He smiled. "You sound like my clerk." "She sounds like your neighbor," Elena corrected. The beacons pulsed. A newcomer convoy waited beyond the gate, hulls obvious in their honesty, flags that had not yet learned the local breeze. Someone in the control tower toggled the corridor lights from red to green. Elena stood. "Work calls," she said. "Before you go," Lutheran said, "answer a question I should have asked when the array first saw you. Whose fleet is this?" Elena looked at the ships, then at the museum with its spiral of mistakes made public, then at the med pad with its white lights brazenly bright. "It belongs to the people who will show up when the microphones are on," she said. "To those who believe consent is worth logistics. To neighbors who'd rather argue than obey and rather repair than win." Lutheran nodded slowly, as if committing the line to the same place he kept star charts and recipes. "Then we are—" "Still at the beginning," Elena said. They shook hands without ceremony. The quartet reached the end of the prelude and began again at bar 1. Kids ran past chanting the unofficial rule of the corridor the way children chant jump rope songs. Count first, aim second, white lights always. The beacons flashed. The crane drone folded and unfolded its wings as if practicing a trick for a kinder age. The galaxy did not become perfect. It became a little more honest at its gates. That was enough to keep faith with the dead and to teach the living that freedom is not a trophy on a mantle, but a habit you perform until it becomes your accent. At the edge of that habit, a convoy slid into the corridor under a sky that was less cruel for having been argued with. And far away, in a place where the Concorde's old maps had left blank space and a warning, a child with a ledger and a pen began to practice writing "We messed up" without flinching. The question that started it all, whose fleet is that? Had an answer anyone could verify without trusting a poet or a general. You could read it on the posted compact. You could see it in the drills. You could hear it in the bell when it called for morning and for work. It belonged to those who kept the count, honored the white lights, and did not mistake order for justice.